Black people in the United States are 3.5 times more likely to be killed at the hands of the police than white Americans. 1 in every 1,000 Black Americans is killed by those who have sworn to serve and protect. Those are numbers that hint at structural problems the country has time and again failed to tackle. To break the cycle, President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris are consulting with lawmakers to discuss ways of moving forward with legislation addressing police brutality. The issue gained new urgency with the death of Tyre Nichols after being beaten by police in the city of Memphis. Speaking at his funeral on Wednesday, the vice president said police reform was badly needed, calling it non-negotiable.
You are my strength.
After days of protests over his death, mourners gathered to celebrate Tyre Nichols' life. His friends, family and civil rights activists attending Mr Nichols' funeral on the first day of Black History Month. Remembering a father, son, brother, a skateboarder and photographer.
Tyre was a beautiful person, and for this to happen to him is just unimaginable.
These flowers now lie in memory of Tyre Nichols at the skate park he used to visit. Mr Nichols died 3 weeks ago after being brutally beaten by Memphis police officers who pulled him over while he was driving home. 5 officers have since been arrested and charged with murder. In his eulogy, civil rights leader Reverend Al Sharpton condemned their actions.
There's nothing more insulting and offensive to those of us that fight to open doors, that you walk through those doors and act like the folks we had to fight for to get you through them doors.
US Vice President Kamala Harris also paid tribute to Mr Nichols, saying the country mourned with his family.
This is a family that lost their son and their brother through an act of violence at the hands and the feet of people who had been charged with keeping them safe. And as Vice President of the United States, we demand that Congress pass the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. Joe Biden will sign it.
Tyre Nichols' family are also calling for the act to be brought in, which would require a database for police officer misconduct and a ban on no-knock warrants. Those calls for change now getting louder in the hope that more lives won't be lost.
And to talk more about the case of Tyre Nichols, I can now welcome Brandon Buskey. He's the director of the ACLU Criminal Law Reform Project in New York City. Mr. Buskey, welcome. The death of Tyre Nichols has painfully reignited the discussion about police brutality and abuse of power in the United States. How deeply rooted is the problem within the police force?
It is, unfortunately, extremely deeply rooted and goes back to the founding of this country. The use of slavery to subjugate Black bodies, the use of proto-police forces to enforce those norms and make sure that there were slave patrols to return property back to masters is only carried through into present-day policing, and that is a major reason why, while extraordinarily tragic, the involvement of Black officers in some ways isn't surprising. And in many ways, it shows the depth of systemic racism in this country and how that lineage can't be eliminated simply by diversifying police forces. It's got to be a much more transformative approach in order to stop these kinds of tragedies.
What made this even more tragic, and you hinted at, is that the officers who beat him up so badly and ultimately leading to his death were Black members of the police force. And the belief was long that if the force reflected the diversity of the community, that these kinds of incidents wouldn't happen or would become extremely rare. So what are the structures in the U.S. police force that encourage violence towards Black people, regardless of the officer's race?
The structures in place that facilitate these kinds of acts are at several levels. There's the individual level, of course, where you have officers coming in who harbor their own implicit biases, be they black or white, and then when they go out to patrol, they express those biases against black people. And that's a common story that we've heard a number of times in the past. But the more important level here really is the structural one, right, which is how officers are trained. You know, we often see in police forces the teaching of a warrior mentality, the idea that police are essentially an occupying force in the communities that they are meant to serve. And the people who are in these communities, especially in these so-called high crime areas, are really enemy combatants, really the enemy. And that's part of, or a major feature in the Tyre Nichols case, where we had a Scorpion unit that was trained to police a high crime neighborhood. There's another level, which is really beyond the training and the individual bias that you might see in these incidents, which is even if you can address individual bias, which is a major question right now, if you are only asking police officers to police certain neighborhoods and you are giving them the weapons of war, or you are continuing to train them to use force without de-escalating, you are still going to see disparities, even if it's not due to the individual bias of police officers. It's due to where they are being asked to police, and the fact that that kind of punitive approach is always going to lead to more disparities with respect to the number of interactions between Black people, and therefore the number of uses of force and often death that Black people experience at the hands of police.
Yeah, your organization, the ACLU, wants to reimagine the role of police. How can that be achieved? And what should a reformed police force, one that really is there to protect and serve everybody, look like?
Reimagining how we approach safety really means thinking about what are the kinds of investments that we need to really ensure true safety. We have too often relied on the police to enforce and arrest our way into a safer neighborhood when we know that there are other components, things like investments in schools, in after-school programs, in job programs that are as much or even more effective than modern-day policing and don't come with the severe downsides of force and risk of death, the use of state violence to enforce norms. We know that we can achieve those things. And ultimately what that requires in terms of the police is to really rethink their role in doing things like enforcing homelessness or addressing mental health crisis or substance abuse crisis. We know
a lot
that
of
those
work ahead. I'm sorry we're going to have to leave it there because we're running out of time. Brandon Buskey of the ACLU joining us from New York City. Great speaking to you.
You as well.